I was standing in my kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard voices and the distinct sound of a truck engine idling in my front yard. And when I glanced out the window, I saw three people in matching neon yellow vests ripping out my newly planted desert sage bushes like they owned the place. My name is Ethan Crawford, and I had moved to Scottsdale, Arizona exactly 4 months ago after landing a software engineering job that finally let me afford a decent house in a nice neighborhood. The place was called Saguaro Heights, one of those planned communities with Spanish tile roofs and manicured lawns that all looked vaguely identical. I had spent the last 3 weekends carefully selecting and planting drought-resistant native plants in my front yard, trying to be environmentally conscious and save on water bills. The previous owner had let the grass die, leaving me with a blank canvas of dirt and rocks. I practically threw my coffee mug in the sink and bolted out the front door, my bare feet hitting the warm concrete of my driveway. It was early March, and the Arizona morning was already heating up to what would probably be a 70-degree day. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, jogging across my lawn toward the three workers who were now loading my bushes into the back of a white pickup truck. One of them, a younger guy with sunburned arms, looked up startled. "HOA approved landscaping correction, sir." "Correction? I just planted these 2 weeks ago. And nobody asked my permission to come onto my property." My heart was pounding, that particular kind of anger that comes from violation of your personal space mixing with complete confusion. An older man with a clipboard stepped forward. "We have a work order from the homeowners association. These plants aren't on the approved landscaping list." He held up the clipboard like it was some kind of badge of authority. "I don't care what list they're on. You can't just come onto my property without telling me." I moved toward the truck bed where I could see at least 6 of my carefully planted bushes, roots exposed and dirt falling everywhere. I had paid almost $300 for those plants, not to mention the hours of back-breaking work digging holes in the rocky Arizona soil. "Sir, when you purchased your home, you agreed to the HOA covenants and restrictions. We sent a violation notice 2 weeks ago." The older man's tone was maddeningly calm, like he was explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "I never got any notice. And even if I did, that doesn't give you the right to trespass and destroy my landscaping." I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm calling the police." The three workers exchanged glances. The older one sighed heavily. "Look, buddy, we're just doing what we were contracted to do. You want to complain, talk to the HOA board. We've got 4 more houses to hit today." "You're not touching anything else on my property," I said firmly, already dialing 911. "In fact, put those bushes back right now." The older guy shook his head. "Can't do that. Work order says remove non-compliant vegetation." The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained that I had people trespassing on my property and destroying my landscaping without permission. She told me an officer would be there within 15 minutes. The workers looked less confident now, murmuring among themselves. "You guys should probably wait," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite wanting to scream. "The police are on their way." The younger worker looked nervous. "Man, they didn't say anything about the cops. I just needed this gig for the day." The older man was already on his phone, walking a few feet away and speaking in low tones. I caught fragments of his conversation, phrases like "homeowner is refusing" and "police have been called." Good. Let whoever hired them deal with this mess. I stood there in my driveway, arms crossed, watching them like a hawk to make sure they didn't touch anything else. My neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, had come out onto her porch and was watching the whole scene with obvious interest. She gave me a small wave, and I nodded back. True to the dispatcher's word, a Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up about 12 minutes later. A female officer in her 30s stepped out, surveying the scene with professional detachment. Her nameplate read Officer Martinez. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" she asked, pulling out a small notepad. I jumped in first. "These people came onto my property without permission and started ripping out my landscaping. They claim the HOA hired them, but I never gave anyone authorization to enter my yard or touch my plants." The older worker stepped forward with his clipboard. "Officer, we have a work order from the Scottsdale Heights HOA to remove non-compliant landscaping. It's all in the homeowner's covenant." Officer Martinez held up a hand. "Let me see that work order." She took the clipboard and read through it carefully. "And do you have proof that proper notice was given to the homeowner?" "The HOA said they sent a violation notice," the older man said, though he sounded less certain now. "That's not what I asked. Do you personally have proof of that notice?" Officer Martinez's tone was professional but firm. "Well, no, the HOA handles that part. We just do the work." She turned to me. "Mr. Crawford, is it? Did you receive any written notice about this landscaping issue?" "Nothing. I check my mail every day. The first I knew about this was when I saw them ripping out my plants through my kitchen window." Officer Martinez nodded slowly, still writing notes. "And these plants they removed, were they your property?" "Yes, I bought them and planted them myself about 2 weeks ago. Cost me almost $300 plus all the work." The officer walked over to the truck and looked at the bushes in the bed. "These look like desert sage. Native plants, right?" "Exactly. I was trying to do the environmentally responsible thing, use native plants that don't need much water." She turned back to the workers. "Here's the situation. Even with an HOA covenant, you can't enter private property and remove someone's belongings without proper notice and without giving them a chance to remedy the situation. That's trespassing and potentially destruction of property." The older man's face reddened. "Look, we were just hired to do a job. The HOA said everything was cleared." "I understand that, and I'm not arresting anyone right now," Officer Martinez said calmly. "But you need to stop work immediately. Mr. Crawford, do you want to press charges?" I thought about it for a moment. These guys were just contractors trying to make a living. The real problem was whoever sent them. Not against them, but I want my bushes back and I want documentation of all this. "Fair enough." Officer Martinez looked at the workers. "Put the plants back where you found them, or at the very least, leave them here for Mr. Crawford to replant. Then you need to leave the property." The workers complied, though with obvious reluctance. They unloaded the bushes from the truck bed, setting them in a sad pile on my driveway. The roots were damaged, dirt everywhere, and I doubted half of them would survive even if I replanted them immediately. As they were finishing up, a silver Mercedes SUV came speeding down the street and pulled up behind the police cruiser. A woman in her late 40s jumped out, wearing tennis whites and enormous sunglasses. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had that particular look of someone used to getting their way. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and nasal. "Officer, these men are doing authorized work for the Homeowners Association." Officer Martinez turned to face her. "And you are?" "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Scottsdale Heights HOA board. We hired these contractors to remove prohibited landscaping, which is well within our rights according to our CC and Articles." "Miss Whitmore," the officer said with exaggerated patience, "did you provide proper written notice to Mr. Crawford before sending contractors onto his property?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "A violation notice was sent 2 weeks ago via email and posted on the community portal." "I never got any email," I interjected. "And I don't even know what the community portal is. Nobody told me about it when I bought the house." "That's not my problem," Patricia snapped, finally looking directly at me. "When you purchased your home, you agreed to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. Ignorance is not an excuse." Officer Martinez held up a hand. "Actually, Miss Whitmore, ignorance is relevant here. If Mr. Crawford genuinely didn't receive notice, you can't send people onto his property to remove his belongings. That's still trespassing, HOA covenant or not." "This is ridiculous." Patricia's voice was rising. "We have rules for a reason. You can't just plant whatever you want and make the neighborhood look like a desert wasteland." "They're native plants," I said, my own anger building again. "Desert sage, penstemon, brittlebush. They're literally designed to thrive in Arizona, and they look great. They look like weeds." Patricia shot back. "The approved plant list includes lantana, bougainvillea, and ornamental grasses, plants that give the community a uniform, upscale appearance. Most of which require way more water than native plants," I countered. "In case you haven't noticed, we live in a desert." "I'm trying to be responsible. I don't care about your environmental crusade. I care about property values and community standards." Officer Martinez stepped between us. "Okay, both of you calm down. Miss Whitmore, your contractors need to leave now. Mr. Crawford, I suggest you review your HOA documents carefully and attend the next board meeting to address this issue properly. If the HOA continues to trespass or destroy your property without proper legal procedure, you should consult an attorney and file formal complaints." Patricia pulled off her sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes. "You haven't heard the last of this, Mr. Crawford. The HOA has the legal authority to maintain community standards, and we will exercise that authority." "Not by trespassing on my property, you won't," I shot back. She spun on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, pulling away with more speed than was probably safe in a residential neighborhood. The contractors had already packed up and left while Patricia and I were arguing. Officer Martinez finished writing up her report and handed me a card. "Keep this incident number. Document everything. Take photos of the damage to your plants, and seriously, get a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. This probably isn't over." "Yeah, I'm getting that impression," I said, looking at the pile of dying bushes on my driveway. "Thank you for coming out. Just doing my job. Good luck with this." She headed back to her cruiser and drove off. I stood there in my driveway for a long moment, just staring at the destruction. The holes where my bushes had been were like open wounds in my front yard. 3 weekends of work, hundreds of dollars, and my hopes for a beautiful, sustainable landscape, all torn apart in less than 30 minutes. Mrs. Patterson crossed the street, moving slowly with her cane. "That Patricia is a piece of work," she said when she reached me. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for 3 years now. You've had problems with her too?" "Oh, honey, everyone has. She fined my son $60 last year because his car was parked in my driveway for 3 days when he visited for Christmas. Said it violated the street parking rules, even though it wasn't on the street." She shook her head. "Most people just pay the fines and do what she says because it's easier than fighting." "Well, I'm not most people," I said, looking at the damage. "This is my property. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president dictate what I can do with my own yard." Mrs. Patterson patted my arm. "Good for you, dear. Just be careful. Patricia doesn't like being challenged, and she's got the rest of the board wrapped around her finger." After Mrs. Patterson headed back home, I spent the next hour trying to replant the bushes, though I knew it was probably futile. The roots were torn, the plants were shocked, and the Arizona sun was already beating down. I watered them heavily and said a silent prayer that some of them might survive. Then I went inside, took a shower to wash off the dirt and frustration, and sat down at my computer. Time to do what I should have done before I even planted anything. Actually read the HOA documents. I found the folder from my home purchase, buried in a filing cabinet. The CC and Articles, covenants, conditions, and restrictions were over 100 pages of dense legal language. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee and started reading. 2 hours later, I had a headache and a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with. The HOA did have rules about landscaping. There was an approved plant list, though it was referenced as Appendix C, which was not actually included in the documents I had. There were provisions for enforcement, including fines up to $500 per violation and the right to cure violations at the homeowner's expense after proper notice. The key phrase was after proper notice. According to the documents, notice had to be sent via certified mail or hand-delivered with proof of receipt. Email notification was listed as a courtesy only, not legally sufficient. There was no mention of any community portal. I grabbed my phone and started searching for HOA attorneys in Scottsdale. The third one I called, a firm called Desert Legal Associates, had a lawyer named Robert Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. His paralegal said he could see me the next day at 2 in the afternoon. The rest of the day was a blur of documenting everything. I took dozens of photos of the damaged plants, the disturbed soil, the entire front yard. I wrote down everything I could remember about the morning's events, including exact quotes where possible. I checked my email thoroughly, going back 6 months. There was nothing from the Sagaro Heights HOA except a generic welcome email from when I had moved in. That evening, I got a notification that something had been pushed through my mail slot. I found an envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal violation notice, dated that same day, informing me that I had planted prohibited vegetation and had 15 days to remedy the violation or face daily fines of $50. There was also a bill for $650 for the landscaping remediation services provided that morning. I actually laughed out loud. They were trying to charge me for destroying my own property. The audacity was almost impressive. The next day at work, I could barely concentrate. I was a senior developer at a tech startup in downtown Scottsdale, and normally I loved my job. But my mind kept drifting back to the violated yard, the damaged plants, Patricia's entitled sneer. By lunchtime, I had accomplished almost nothing useful. My coworker Jake noticed. "Dude, you okay? You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes without typing anything." I told him the whole story. Jake listened with increasing disbelief. "That's insane, man. Can they even do that?" Apparently they think they can. "I've got a lawyer appointment this afternoon to figure out what my options are." "HOAs are the worst," Jake said, shaking his head. "My parents dealt with one in Florida that tried to fine them because their grass was half an inch too long. Half an inch. My dad measured it with a ruler to prove they were wrong." At 2 o'clock, I was sitting in a surprisingly nice office in Old Town Scottsdale, across from Robert Chen. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed, wearing a perfectly tailored suit despite the Arizona heat. I had brought all my documentation, photos, the violation notice, and the ridiculous bill. Robert reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. After about 15 minutes, he looked up. "Okay, here's the good news. They screwed up badly. They didn't follow their own enforcement procedures, they trespassed, and they destroyed your property without proper notice. You have grounds for a lawsuit, both against the HOA as an entity and potentially against Patricia Whitmore personally. And the bad news: lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming. Even with a strong case, you're looking at months of litigation and legal fees that could run into the tens of thousands, though you can seek to recover those costs if you win. He leaned back in his chair. However, I think we can resolve this without going to court, at least initially. I'll draft a demand letter laying out the violations of their own procedures, the trespassing, and the property damage. We'll demand that they reimburse you for the plants, withdraw the violation and the bill, and agree not to interfere with your landscaping choices as long as they're reasonable. What are the chances they'll actually agree to that? Robert smiled slightly. If they're smart, pretty good. If they're stubborn and prideful, which many HOA boards are, they might fight. But the law is clearly on your side here. They can't just bulldoze due process because they don't like your plant choices. What about the plants themselves? They're not on their approved list. Here's the thing about HOA approved lists, Robert said, flipping through my documents. They have to be reasonable. You can't ban all native plants in Arizona and require water-intensive ornamental species. That could actually violate state water conservation policies. Arizona has been moving toward encouraging xeriscaping and native landscaping, especially in drought-prone areas. Some HOAs have gotten in trouble for overly restrictive landscaping rules that conflict with environmental best practices. This was sounding better. So, what do I do now? Don't pay the bill. Don't pay any fines. Don't remove the plants. Keep documenting everything. I'll have the demand letter ready in 2 days and we'll send it certified mail. In the meantime, I'd suggest going to the next HOA board meeting and making your case publicly. It's always good to have witnesses to your attempts at reasonable resolution. I left his office feeling better than I had in 24 hours. I wasn't just a victim here. I had options, and I had the law on my side. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7, held in the community center building near the neighborhood entrance. I had never been to one before, never even thought about it. I had imagined HOA meetings as boring affairs where neighbors argued about trash can placement and whether pool hours should be extended. I arrived at 6:50 to find the parking lot already half full. Apparently these meetings drew a crowd. The community center was a bland stucco building with a large meeting room that had been set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was already there, looking through some papers. She didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. I took a seat in the third row. Other residents filtered in, most of them older, many of them giving Patricia careful, almost nervous glances. Mrs. Patterson arrived and sat next to me. "First meeting," she whispered. "Yeah, how bad is it? You'll see." At 7 o'clock sharp, Patricia called the meeting to order by rapping a small gavel against the table. There were 4 other board members, 2 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and 2 women who seemed to hang on Patricia's every word. The meeting started with routine business. Minutes from the last meeting were approved. The treasurer gave a financial report showing the HOA had over $200,000 in reserves. There was discussion about resurfacing the tennis courts and whether to hire a new pool maintenance company. Then Patricia got to what she called enforcement issues. "We continue to have some residents who seem to think HOA rules don't apply to them," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We had to take corrective action on a property this week where prohibited plants were installed without architectural approval." I stood up. "I'd like to address that." Patricia's eyes snapped to me. "The public comment period is at the end of the meeting. This is about me, so I think I should be allowed to respond." One of the male board members, a nervous-looking guy with glasses, cleared his throat. "Patricia, maybe we should let him speak. Keep things transparent." Patricia's jaw clenched, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. State your name for the record." "Ethan Crawford, 2847 Desert Willow Drive." On Tuesday morning, the HOA sent contractors onto my property without my knowledge or permission. They trespassed, dug up plants that I had legally purchased and installed, and damaged my landscaping. When I confronted them and called the police, I learned that the HOA claimed they had sent me proper notice, which they had not. I never received any certified mail, no hand-delivered notice, nothing except an email I never got. I pulled out my folder of documents. According to the CC and Articus, enforcement actions require proper notice via certified mail or hand delivery. The HOA violated its own procedures. Patricia's face was turning red. "We sent notification via the community portal, which all homeowners are required to check regularly." "Show me where in the CC and Articus it says the community portal constitutes proper legal notice," I challenged. "I've read all 107 pages. It's not there." The nervous board member was flipping through his own copy of the documents. The room had gone very quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. "Furthermore," I continued, "the plants I installed are native Arizona species, specifically chosen for water conservation and environmental sustainability. The HOA's approved plant list consists primarily of non-native, water-intensive ornamental plants. I'd like to know how that complies with Arizona water conservation guidelines and current environmental best practices." One of the women on the board spoke up for the first time. Her name placard read Donna Simmons. "We're required to maintain a certain aesthetic standard to protect property values." "At what cost?" I asked. "Should we waste thousands of gallons of water per year keeping non-native plants alive in a desert so lawns look identical?" "That seems both environmentally irresponsible and financially foolish for homeowners." Several people in the audience were nodding. I noticed a few of them pulling out their phones, probably recording this. Patricia tried to regain control. "Mr. Crawford, you agreed to abide by HOA rules when you purchased your property. If you don't like the rules, you shouldn't have bought here." "I agreed to follow rules that are legally enforced according to proper procedures," I shot back. "I didn't agree to have the HOA trespass on my property and destroy my belongings without due process. And I certainly didn't agree to be billed $650 for the privilege of having my landscaping demolished." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The nervous board member was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I think we should table this discussion for executive session," Patricia said quickly. "No," I said firmly. "This is a community issue. These enforcement actions were taken publicly. They should be discussed publicly. I want to know if the board voted to authorize this action, and if so, whether they were aware that proper notice procedures weren't followed." The nervous board member, whose nameplate I could now see read Thomas Green, spoke up. "Patricia handles most enforcement issues directly. She presents them to the board after action has been taken. So the board didn't vote to send contractors onto my property." "Well, no, not specifically your property. Patricia has discretionary authority for enforcement up to a certain dollar amount." "And do the rest of you know that she didn't follow proper notice procedures before taking that action?" The four other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Clearly, they hadn't known. Patricia was glaring daggers at Thomas Green. "I think Mr. Crawford makes some valid points," Thomas said, gaining confidence. "Maybe we should review our enforcement procedures to make sure we're following the CC and Articus correctly." "Our procedures are fine," Patricia snapped. What we need is for residents to follow the rules instead of trying to find loopholes. Following due process isn't a loophole, I said. It's the law. An older man in the back row stood up. I'd like to say something. I'm Richard Holloway, been living here for 8 years. Patricia, you've been running this HOA like your personal fiefdom for too long. I got fined $300 last year because my son parked his car in my driveway for a week at Christmas. A week. In my own driveway. And when I tried to appeal, you told me I should just pay it and stop complaining. That's because extended vehicle parking is against the rules, Patricia said icily. It was my son's car at my house for a holiday visit. Richard's voice was rising. It's ridiculous. Other people started speaking up, sharing their own stories. A woman had been fined for putting up Christmas lights 2 days before the approved decoration period. Another family got a violation notice because their teenage son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. Someone else had been threatened with daily fines because they painted their front door a slightly different shade of tan than the approved color palette. The meeting was turning into a revolt. Patricia was banging her gavel, trying to restore order, but people kept standing up and sharing their grievances. Years of built-up frustration were pouring out. Finally, Thomas Green stood up and raised his hands. Okay, everyone, please, let's calm down and address this systematically. Patricia, I think it's clear that many residents feel our enforcement has been overly aggressive and not always fair. Maybe we need to form a committee to review our procedures and make sure we're balancing community standards with reasonable homeowner rights. We don't need a committee, Patricia said coldly. We need residents who follow the rules. I disagree, Thomas said, and I could see him visibly deciding to take a stand. And I move that we suspend all enforcement actions pending a full review of our procedures by an independent attorney to ensure we're in compliance with both our CC and Artiques and state law. I second that motion, said the other male board member, whose name I learned was Frank Martinez. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. That's absurd. We'll have chaos. Let's vote, Thomas said. All in favor of suspending enforcement actions pending legal review. Thomas and Frank raised their hands. After a moment's hesitation, Donna Simmons raised her hand too. The other woman, Gloria Chen, looked at Patricia and kept her hand down. Motion carries, 3-2, Thomas announced. Patricia, I think it's also appropriate for you to reimburse Mr. Crawford for his damaged plants and withdraw the violation and bill until we've had this review done. I will not, Patricia said, her voice shaking with rage. Then I move that the board formally reverses the enforcement action against Mr. Crawford and authorizes reimbursement for his damaged property to be paid from our operating account. Second, Frank said immediately. The vote was the same, 3-2. Patricia looked like she might actually have a stroke. This meeting is adjourned, she practically snarled, gathering her papers and storming out of the room. The room erupted in conversation. Several people came up to thank me for speaking up. Mrs. Patterson was beaming. Thomas Green approached me, looking both relieved and nervous. I'm sorry about all this, he said. I've been on the board for 2 years and Patricia has dominated every decision. Most of us were afraid to challenge her. Why? I asked. She's ruthless. She runs a successful real estate business in Scottsdale, has a lot of connections. People are afraid she'll make their lives difficult. He shook his head. But tonight showed me that the residents are fed up. Maybe it's time for some changes. Good, I said. Because I'm not backing down, and I have a lawyer ready to sue if the HOA doesn't make this right. You shouldn't need to do that now. The board voted to reimburse you and withdraw the violation. I'll make sure that happens. I went home that night feeling vindicated but exhausted. The emotional roller coaster of the past few days was catching up with me. I fell asleep on my couch before 9 o'clock. The next morning, I woke up to my doorbell ringing insistently. I stumbled to the door in my pajama pants to find a Scottsdale police officer on my doorstep. Not Officer Martinez from before, but a male officer who looked very serious. "Ethan Crawford?" he asked. My heart sank. "Yes. I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions about a vandalism incident." "Vandalism? What are you talking about?" "Patricia Whitmore's vehicle was vandalized last night. Paint stripper poured on the hood, all 4 tires slashed. She's filed a report and claims you threatened her at an HOA meeting." "I didn't threaten her, and I definitely didn't vandalize her car. I was home all night alone after the meeting." "Can anyone verify that?" I thought frantically. "No, but I didn't do it." "This is insane, sir. I need you to come with me to answer some questions. You're not under arrest, but we need to get your statement." I quickly threw on clothes and went with him, my mind racing. This was Patricia's revenge. She was trying to frame me for vandalism. At the station, I was put in an interview room and questioned by a detective named Sarah Morrison. She was professional but firm, asking me to walk through my entire evening after the HOA meeting. I left the community center around 7:45. Drove straight home. Mrs. Patterson can verify I was at the meeting, and probably a dozen other people saw me there. After I got home, I ordered pizza online from Grimaldi's at around 8:15. The delivery guy showed up at 8:50. I have the receipt and the delivery tracking. "What time did the driver leave?" "Maybe 8:55. I gave him a tip. We chatted for like a minute about the weather. Then I ate pizza, watched Netflix, and fell asleep on my couch around 9. "Can anyone verify you stayed home after that?" "No, I live alone." Detective Morrison made notes. "What's your relationship with Patricia Whitmore?" I explained the entire situation, the destroyed plants, the trespassing, the HOA meeting. She listened carefully. "So you had a conflict with her, and then her car gets vandalized the same night," she said. "Yes, and I'm sure she's trying to make it look like I did it because I'm fighting back against her HOA overreach. But I didn't. I'm not stupid and I'm not a vandal. I'm handling this through legal channels." "You own Paint Stripper or have access to it?" "No. I'm a software engineer, not a contractor. I don't have that kind of stuff." The questioning went on for another 30 minutes before Detective Morrison finally said I was free to go. "We're investigating all possibilities. Don't leave town and don't contact Miss Whitmore." "Believe me, I have no desire to talk to her." I called Robert Chen from the parking lot of the police station and told him what happened. He swore softly. "This is escalating in bad ways," he said. "Patricia Whitmore is either genuinely convinced you vandalized her car, or she's trying to discredit you and your claims against the HOA. Either way, we need to be very careful. Can she do this? Just falsely accuse me of a crime? If she genuinely believes you did it, it's not a false accusation. If she's lying to police, that's a different story. But proving that would be very difficult." He paused. "Do you have any security cameras at your house?" "No, I've only been here 4 months. That's not something I've set up yet." "Get some installed today, front and back, and keep documenting everything. If Patricia is going to play dirty, we need to be ready." I spent the rest of Friday installing a Ring doorbell camera and 2 outdoor security cameras covering my front and back yards. The timing bothered me because it looked reactive, but I needed the protection. On Saturday morning, I received an email from Thomas Green with an attached check image for $800, covering the cost of my plants plus the time to replant them, and a formal letter withdrawing the violation notice and the remediation bill. At least, that was resolved. But Saturday afternoon brought a new development. A process server showed up at my door with a civil suit. Patricia Whitmore was suing me personally for the vandalism to her vehicle, claiming damages of $15,000 for the car repairs, diminished vehicle value, and emotional distress. I immediately forwarded everything to Robert Chen. He called me back within an hour. "Okay, this is actually good news in a weird way," he said. "How is being sued good news? Because now we're in discovery. We can subpoena her phone records, her movements that night, security camera footage from her house and nearby. If she's lying about this, or if there's any evidence that she staged this herself or knows who really did it, we'll find it. And we can countersue for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. You think she might have staged it herself? I think Patricia Whitmore is someone who's used to getting her way and who views you as a threat to her control of the HOA. People like that sometimes do desperate things. Or maybe someone else who's angry at her did it and she's using it as an opportunity to go after you. Either way, we fight it hard. The next week was a nightmare of stress. I couldn't focus at work. Every time my phone rang, I expected more bad news. The police investigation into the vandalism was ongoing, and I knew I was their primary suspect. On Wednesday, I got a call from Detective Morrison asking me to come back to the station. My stomach dropped. Was I about to be arrested? But when I arrived, her demeanor was different. She actually looked almost apologetic. "Mr. Crawford, we've reviewed security camera footage from several houses in Miss Whitmore's neighborhood," she said. "We have video of a dark-colored sedan driving slowly past her house around midnight the night of the vandalism. The car stops, someone gets out, approaches her vehicle, and spends about 5 minutes near it before driving away." "Okay," I said cautiously. "So you know it wasn't me. The person in the video is female, approximately 5'6", medium build. You're clearly not a match." She pulled out a photo. "Do you recognize this vehicle?" I looked at the grainy security camera image. It was hard to make out details, but it was definitely a dark sedan, maybe black or dark blue. "No, I don't think so. The license plate is partially visible. We're running it now." She paused. "I owe you an apology. We should have looked at this evidence before bringing you in for questioning. Does Patricia know about this? We've informed her that we have video evidence and that you're no longer considered a suspect." I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. "What about her civil suit against me? That's between you and your lawyers, but you might want to let them know about this development." Robert was thrilled when I told him. "Perfect. We'll move to dismiss her suit immediately and we'll file our counterclaim." HOA members have been contacting me too, by the way. Apparently word has spread about your case, and at least 6 other homeowners want to join a class action against the HOA for various enforcement overreaches. A class action. Patricia and the board have been aggressive with enforcement for years. You're not the first person they've gone after, just the first one to fight back publicly and with legal representation. Now others are coming forward with their own stories. Things moved quickly after that. Robert filed to dismiss Patricia's lawsuit against me, attaching the police report showing I wasn't a suspect. He also filed a counterclaim against her and the HOA for trespassing, destruction of property, harassment, and abuse of process. The demand was for $50,000 in damages, attorney fees, and a court order forcing the HOA to revise its enforcement procedures. 2 weeks later, the Scottsdale police identified the person who had vandalized Patricia's car. It turned out to be the ex-wife of another HOA board member, Frank Martinez. She had targeted Patricia's car thinking it would cause problems for Frank, with whom she was in a bitter divorce dispute. She apparently didn't even know about the situation with me. She was arrested and charged with criminal damage. Patricia's insurance covered the repairs to her vehicle. And suddenly, Patricia's civil case against me looked very foolish indeed. The HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting in early April. Thomas Green had submitted a formal request, signed by over 40 homeowners, calling for Patricia's removal as board president. When I arrived at the community center, the parking lot was packed. People were standing in the back because there weren't enough chairs. Patricia sat at the board table looking smaller somehow, less imperious. Her lawyer sat next to her, a stern-faced man in an expensive suit. Thomas called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss a vote of no confidence in the current board president and to address the multiple legal issues facing the HOA. Patricia's lawyer stood up. "Before we proceed, I'd like to state for the record that Miss Whitmore denies any wrongdoing and maintains that all enforcement actions were taken in good faith according to HOA guidelines." "Good faith," someone shouted from the audience. "She destroyed Mr. Crawford's landscaping." The meeting quickly became heated. Person after person stood up to share their experiences with what they felt was unfair or overly aggressive enforcement. A woman talked about being fined $50 because her trash can was visible from the street for 2 hours on a non-trash day. A man described being threatened with a lien on his house over a $100 fine for having a small decorative flag in his front yard. Through it all, Patricia sat stone-faced, refusing to engage or apologize. When it came time for the vote, it was overwhelming. All 4 other board members voted to remove Patricia as president and from the board entirely. The homeowners in attendance erupted in applause. Patricia stood up, her face bright red. "You people are making a huge mistake. This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership. Property values will plummet." "Property values are fine," Thomas said calmly. "What we need is leadership that respects homeowners' rights and follows proper procedures. Thank you for your service, Patricia, but it's time for new direction." Patricia grabbed her briefcase and stormed out for the second time in as many weeks, her lawyer hurrying after her. The board immediately voted to hire an independent attorney to review all HOA enforcement procedures and revise them to ensure compliance with state law and the CC and Articus. They also voted to form a landscape committee to expand the approved plant list to include native and drought-resistant species. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to shake my hand and thank me. Mrs. Patterson hugged me. "You did good, dear. You stood up to a bully and look what happened." "I just wanted to plant some bushes," I said with a laugh. "Sometimes that's all it takes to start a revolution." The legal case dragged on for several more weeks. Robert kept pushing, and finally in late May, the HOA's insurance company convinced them to settle. They agreed to pay me $35,000, which covered my actual damages, attorney fees, and compensation for the harassment and stress. They also agreed to formal policy changes requiring proper notice for all enforcement actions and establishing an appeal process for disputed violations. Patricia's personal lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile it. Robert then filed an ethical complaint against her with the Arizona Bar, as she was technically acting in a legal oversight capacity for the HOA and had violated procedures. In June, I finally got around to replanting my front yard. This time I worked with a landscaping designer who specialized in native plants. We created a beautiful desert garden with sage, penstemon, ocotillo, and several varieties of agave. It looked stunning and used about 10% of the water that a traditional grass lawn would have required. My new Ring cameras captured something interesting one evening. Patricia drove slowly past my house, stopped, and stared at my landscaping for a long moment before driving away. She never contacted me, never apologized, but I like to think that maybe, just maybe, she realized how ridiculous the whole fight had been. The new HOA board with Thomas Green as president was a breath of fresh air. They sent out newsletters explaining changes to enforcement procedures. They established regular office hours where homeowners could ask questions or raise concerns. They even held a community barbecue in July where neighbors could get to know each other. I learned from Mrs. Patterson that Patricia had moved out of Sagaro Heights in August. She sold her house and relocated to a different part of Scottsdale. Good riddance, most people seem to think. The class action lawsuit that Robert had mentioned ended up including 15 families and was settled in September for a total of $250,000, paid by the HOA's insurance. The board used the opportunity to completely overhaul their approach, focusing on actual community enhancement rather than petty enforcement. My desert garden thrived through the brutal Arizona summer. Neighbors would stop by to ask about the plants, and several of them started installing native landscaping in their own yards. By October, at least a dozen houses in Sagaro Heights had transitioned away from water-hungry grass to beautiful, sustainable desert gardens. I never saw Patricia again, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her real estate business had taken a hit after word spread about the HOA fiasco. Apparently, prospective clients didn't want to work with someone known for being an unreasonable tyrant. One Saturday afternoon in November, I was out front adding some new plants when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They were clearly house shopping, looking at the for sale sign across the street. "Excuse me," the woman called over. "Do you live here?" "Can I ask you about the neighborhood?" I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. "Sure, I've been here about 10 months now." "How's the HOA? We've heard some horror stories about Scottsdale HOAs." I smiled. "Actually, the HOA here is pretty good. They just went through some major reforms. New leadership, new policies, much more focused on community building than nitpicky enforcement." "That's great to hear," the husband said. "And your yard looks amazing. Are those all native plants?" "Yep. The HOA actually encourages them now, water conservation and all that." They thanked me and moved on to continue their house tour. I went back to my planting, thinking about how much had changed in less than a year. That evening, Thomas Green called me. "Ethan, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're planning to nominate you for the board at the annual meeting in January. We think your perspective would be valuable, and you've already proven you're willing to stand up for what's right." I thought about it for a moment. A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined myself caring about HOA politics. But now, after everything that had happened, I felt invested in making sure Sagaro Heights remained a place where people could actually enjoy their homes without fear of petty tyranny. "You know what? I'd be honored," I said. "Excellent. The annual meeting is January 15th. We'll make it official then." December brought cooler weather and the holidays. The HOA organized a community lights display, and for the first time in years, according to Mrs. Patterson, there wasn't a single fine issued for incorrect decoration dates or unapproved light colors. People decorated how they wanted, and the neighborhood looked festive and welcoming. On New Year's Eve, I hosted a small party at my house. Jake from work came, along with several of my neighbors including Mrs. Patterson and Thomas Green and his wife. We stood in my backyard, watching fireworks bloom over the Scottsdale skyline, toasting to new beginnings. "To standing up for yourself," Jake said, raising his glass. "To community," Mrs. Patterson added. "To reasonable HOAs," Thomas laughed. "To native plants," I said, and everyone groaned but drank anyway. The annual HOA meeting in January was nothing like the contentious affairs of the previous year. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost friendly. Thomas presented the year's accomplishments, including the new enforcement procedures, the expanded plant list, and the successful resolution of all legal issues. When it came time for board nominations, I was elected along with 2 other new members. We all committed to continuing the community-focused approach that Thomas had championed. As I drove home that night, I passed by the spot where my desert garden had been destroyed almost exactly 11 months earlier. The plants had grown in beautifully, fuller and healthier than I could have imagined. What had started as a violation and a fight had turned into something positive for the entire community. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert Chen. "Saw you got elected to the HOA board. Guess I'll be losing a good source of business," I texted back. "Maybe you should hope for more clients like me who stand up to bullies." "Fair point. Congratulations on the election. Try not to let the power go to your head." "I'll do my best," I replied, pulling into my driveway. Inside, I poured myself a bourbon and sat on my back patio, looking up at the stars. It had been one hell of a year. I had moved to Scottsdale looking for a fresh start, a nice house in a good neighborhood, a chance to build a life in the desert I'd always loved. What I got was a crash course in HOA politics, property law, and standing up for yourself when institutions abuse their power. I'd made enemies and allies, spent months stressed and angry, and ultimately helped change an entire community for the better. And all because I wanted to plant some native bushes in my front yard. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes refusing to back down in the face of petty tyranny inspires others to find their own courage. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing actually works out. I raised my glass to the desert sky, to Patricia wherever she was, to Thomas and Mrs. Patterson and all the neighbors who had stood up with me, to every person who had ever faced down an unreasonable HOA and refused to be bullied. Then I went inside, pulled up my laptop, and started researching best practices for HOA governance. If I was going to be on the board, I was going to do it right. No more Patricia Whitmores in Saguaro Heights. Not on my watch. The next morning, I woke up early and went out to water my desert garden, though it barely needed it. The plants were designed for this climate, thriving in the dry Arizona air with minimal care. A roadrunner skittered across my front yard, stopping to regard me with its beady eye before dashing off. This was home now. Not just the house, but the community. And I was committed to keeping it a place where people could live their lives without constant fear of violation notices and arbitrary fines. My phone rang. It was Thomas. "Morning, Ethan. Quick question. We're getting inquiries from other HOAs in the area asking about our reforms. Apparently word has spread about what happened here, and other boards are interested in updating their own procedures. Would you be willing to speak at a regional HOA conference in March?" I laughed. "Me? Give a speech? You're the face of this whole thing." The homeowner who stood up and sparked change. "People want to hear your story." I thought about all the people in Scottsdale, in Phoenix, across Arizona, and probably across the country who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. People being fined for trivial violations, having their property rights trampled, living in fear of anonymous complaints and aggressive boards. If my experience could help even a few of them, it was worth sharing. "Yeah, okay," I said. "I'll do it. Great, I'll send you the details." After we hung up, I stood in my driveway, looking at my house, my garden, my neighborhood. The morning sun was already warming the air, promising another beautiful Arizona day. I had come here looking for a home. What I found was a purpose. And really, that was worth more than any perfect landscaping could ever be. The end of one battle, I thought, and the beginning of something better. Not just for me, but for everyone who believed that HOAs should serve their communities, not rule them like personal fiefdoms. I smiled, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed to my car. Time to get to work, both at my day job and my new role as an advocate for reasonable HOA governance. It was going to be a good day, and somewhere out there, I hoped Patricia Whitmore was learning that power without accountability always falls. That communities built on respect and mutual understanding always outlast those built on fear and arbitrary rules. That sometimes the people you try to crush find the strength to push back, and when they do, everything changes. My desert garden stood as proof of that. Native, sustainable, beautiful, and completely legal. A small rebellion that became a revolution. All because one Tuesday morning I looked out my kitchen window and decided I wasn't going to let anyone destroy what I had built. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying no. One person standing up. One person refusing to back down. And then, if you're lucky, you find out you were never really alone at all.